It's all about trends. We live in the Anthropocene, a period where human actions have altered the natural systems of our world at a speed and scale we have never seen before. Physical processes can no longer be examined in isolation because human processes have become the dominant driver, changing even the air we breathe. Let me start with some audience interaction here. Take a deep breath. Everyone, take a deep breath. The air you just inhaled contained 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide. You have just made history. We are the first humans ever to have breathed CO2 in that concentration. When I was a young boy, it was only 320 ppm. In my lifetime, we have gone through an era called the Great Acceleration. The famous hockey stick chart of global greenhouse gas emissions describes only one manifestation of this era. This has not stopped. We continue to consume natural capital faster than ever, faster than we may realize. Without a system of ecological accounting, nations have been known to blindly consume their limited natural capital. The Global Footprint Network utilizes the metrics of ecological accounting to provide such a guide. By offering a gauge of the rate at which this is happening, GFN measures the size of the human footprint. As of last year, GFN reports that the global human footprint stands 50% beyond the planet's sustainable limits. Within Asia-Pacific, we are already 77% beyond the region's sustainable limits. The Philippines sits 117% beyond our country's sustainable limits, and Metro Manila, with a footprint per capita of 1.7 global hectares and biocapacity, precariously perched at barely 0.05 global hectares per capita, is 3,400% beyond the capital region's sustainable limits. Humanity is already consuming more than it can afford. Globally, we are well into ecological overshoot. We are eating ourselves up. Over the next 35 years, Philippine population will rise from 100 million to 140 million. Global population is rising from 7 billion to 9 billion. There are already more people living inside the Asia-Pacific region than outside it. Urbanization is here. It is likely that 60 to 70% will live in cities. Is it plausible to say that overall consumption will not increase any further? A new global middle class is emerging. Globally, it is estimated that this new middle class could involve as many as 2 billion people. They will want to spend what they have worked hard for. Consumption patterns will change. They may also insist that domestic demand be given priority over exports. Trade is a frequently used way for economies to cope with resource scarcities. How much longer will trade remain a viable option? When the game changes, an ace may suddenly become a wild card. If we add on the layer of climate change aggravations, the challenge gets even more complex. In 2009, the WWF Coral Triangle Program released a climate change study founded on 300 peer-reviewed articles. In essence, that study pointed out 6 scenarios that will define our future. It is likely that the El Niño will persist as a source of interannual variability. Prediction and decision-making will become increasingly more complex. It is likely that sea surface temperatures will continue to rise. As a result, it is likely that we will see accelerating ice melt, thermal expansion, and sea level rise. Ocean acidification is likely to rear its ugly head. Extreme weather events are likely to become more frequent and disruptive. Historical rainfall, flooding, as well as drought are likely to increase. These impacts will be non-linear. They will also vary from place to place. When climate provides no clear, single trajectory, our challenge is to proactively work with a spectrum of scenarios and acknowledge that humankind will need to accept flexible decision trees that are imprecisely right, rather than dwell on rigid, old-school frameworks that may prove to be precisely wrong. Every sector, without exception, must learn to improvise rather than simply improve. We are gathered today to table and discuss solutions that focus on agriculture and food security in a climate-defined future. We are dealing with the management of risk. It is clear that our challenge is fraught with risk. It is not simply to produce more, but rather to figure out how to sustainably produce more with less under complex and highly variable solutions in a nexus it shares with water and energy. Allow me to end this message with some questions. Beyond the producer, shouldn't we consider the role of the consumer as well? Beyond the laudable principle of shared resource translating to shared value, shouldn't we regard this as a shared responsibility or a continuum extending from production to consumption? Rather than simply producing more per hectare, shouldn't we be thinking of consuming less per capita? Looking at source and use, supply and demand, both today and tomorrow. Food security affects economic realities, such as inflation. It therefore influences national viability. Acknowledging the reality that the world is not a level playing field, are we giving sufficient attention, importance, and incentive to building options for decentralized subsets of self-sufficiency within all economies? Does increased productivity per hectare translate to lower costs? Is this merely founded on building domestic capacity, or does local creativity have a crucial role to play as we push the edge of possibility while facing the climate challenge? The question has never been whether or not to develop, but how to develop and at what cost. The experience we have had with accreditation options, for example, housed in the high overhead sanctums of the developed world, have often served to polarize and marginalize rather than mainstream sustainable practice in several major production sectors. One size never fits all. Will there be a growing role for enhanced participatory guarantee systems founded on strengthened shared value chains? Beyond coping, adaptation, and mere resilience, shouldn't the business sector be looking more closely at new thinking and new formulas, as well as the role of redundancies that deliver on sustained viability and competitiveness? There is no sense in denying that for businesses and farms, both large and small, this is the bottom line. The situation is neither black nor white. We face a spectrum of grays. Is there a way to cobble together a mosaic of locally appropriate formulas that fuel sustainable production, strengthen shared value, while involving the consumer? These are only some of the questions that we will wrestle with this week. This is, after all, a journey. Beyond destinations, I hope we are able to define pathways. I welcome all of you to Manila, where we hope to build new partnerships for a sustainable future. We have a special guest this morning from the Philippine Cabinet. He is a thought leader, a patriot, an innovator constantly seeking solutions, a friend. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Secretary Francis Pangilinan.